The Duke of Langbourne had crossed half the length of Wexhall's crowded assembly room before he understood that he had risen from his chair at all, and by then it was far too late to pretend otherwise. Every candle in every crystal branch above him seemed to burn a shade too bright, and every conversation nearest the wall had faltered into that particular hush that follows a man of consequence when he moves without invitation. He stopped at the edge of the dance floor, near the tall windows where the draught kept the finer ladies away, and there he found what had drawn him. A young woman in a plain gray gown, seated alone on the servant's side of the room, mending a torn flounce that did not belong to her. His name was Everard Thorne, 9th Duke of Langbourne, and he was accounted the wealthiest man in 3 counties. He was not accustomed to being ignored. Yet the woman had not once looked toward the great crush of dancers, had not glanced at him as he approached, and had not, he realized with something between offense and admiration, the smallest awareness that she had done anything remarkable at all. She had simply seen a girl weeping over a ruined hem in the retiring room doorway, and set herself to fixing it, needle flashing, while the whole gilded world spun on without her. "You will strain your eyes in this light," Everard said. She looked up then, and he saw that her face was neither the practiced prettiness of the season's beauties nor anything he could have named in advance. It was a quiet face, grave and clear-eyed, with a small line of concentration still between her brows. "The light is sufficient, Your Grace," she said, and returned to her work. "The young lady is due back on the floor for the next set. It would grieve her to sit it out." "And who is the young lady to you, that you should give up your own evening to her hem?" "My stepsister." She bit the thread neatly and shook the silk loose. "There, it will hold." Only then did she rise and curtsy, low and correct, and he noticed that her slippers had been mended more than once. "I ought not to keep you, Your Grace. You will be missed." He was, in fact, being missed with great energy across the room. He could feel the pull of it, the mothers arranging their daughters, the men with their careful greetings, the whole apparatus of an evening built around the question of where the Duke of Langbourne would bestow his attention. He had endured a decade of it since his father's death, and he had grown so weary of being wanted for his title that he had nearly stopped attending altogether. He looked at the gray-gowned woman and found, to his surprise, that he did not wish to be missed at all. "You have not told me your name," he said. "Miss Rowena Fairley." A hesitation. "My stepfather is Sir Marcus Pruitt of Ashcombe." He knew the name. Pruitt was a baronet of loud ambitions and thin land, a man who had married a widow with a modest fortune and had spent the years since trying to marry his own daughters upward. Everard had refused 3 separate invitations to Ashcombe in as many years. He had not known there was a stepdaughter at all. Before he could say another word, a voice cut sweetly across the space between them. "Rowena, there you are, hiding in the corners again." 2 young women swept up in a rustle of colored silk, both handsome in the bright, hard way that a great deal of money and a good deal of instruction could produce. The elder wore rose, the younger a shade of daffodil that suited no one, and both stopped short when they registered whom their stepsister had been speaking to. Their curtsies, when they came, were deep enough to graze the floor. "Your Grace," said the elder, breathless. "Miss Pruitt. My sister, Miss Georgiana Pruitt. We had no notion Rowena would presume to trouble you. She has so little sense of company, you understand, having been raised very retired." "She was mending your gown, Miss Pruitt," Everard said. Miss Pruitt Selina, he would later learn, colored and laughed. "How like her! She is very useful about the house. Mamma, that is, our late mother's kin would say we should not know what to do without her." The words were kind on their surface and unkind entirely underneath, and Rowena did not so much as flinch. She had, he understood, heard them 1,000 times. She stood a half-step behind her stepsisters as though the position had been assigned to her at birth, her mended slippers together, her gray gown dull as ash beside their silks, and she waited to be dismissed. "Miss Fairley," Everard said, and had the small, fierce pleasure of watching all 3 heads turn at once, "may I have the honor of the next set?" The silence that followed was worth every tedious hour he had ever spent in a ballroom. Selina's smile froze upon her face. Georgiana's mouth opened and closed. And Rowena looked at him as though he had spoken in a language she had given up expecting to hear, with a wariness so deep it bordered on fear, as if a kindness offered in public could only be the setup for a cruelty to follow. "Your grace is very good," she said carefully, "but I do not dance. I have no card and it would not be." "You have no card because no one has asked you," he said. "I am asking you." He held out his hand. It was, he was aware, an outrageous thing to do. By morning it would be in every drawing room in the county. He found he did not care. "The set is forming. Will you refuse a duke in front of the whole room?" Something flickered behind her grave eyes, not vanity, not triumph, but a flash of pure defiance, quickly hidden at the trap he had laid. Then she put her hand in his. It was a working hand, he noticed, warm and a little rough at the fingertips, and she held herself very straight as he led her out, past her stunned stepsisters, past the whispering wall into the light. She danced well, though stiffly at first, as one recalling steps long unused. "You needn't have done that," she said under the music, not looking at him. "You have made things a great deal harder for me. When we return to Ashcombe, I shall pay for this dance for a fortnight." "Then it was cruel of me," he said, "and I am sorry for it, but I will not unmake it. Tell me, do they always speak of you so?" "They speak of me as they find me." Her chin lifted. "I keep my stepfather's accounts, and I manage his household, and I mend what wants mending, and in return I am fed and clothed and given a roof, which is more than a great many are given. I have no complaint, your grace." "You have a great many complaints," he said. "You are simply too proud to voice them to a stranger." For the first time the corner of her mouth moved, almost a smile, quickly suppressed. "You are very sure of yourself." "It is a failing I am told I have." He turned her through the figure, and for a moment her hand tightened on his and the stiffness left her, and she was simply a young woman dancing on a bright night, alive to the music. "Tell me one true thing," he said, "and I will let you go back to your corner. What did you wish for tonight before you gave your evening to a torn hem?" She was quiet a long moment. "That the music would go on a little longer than it does," she said at last, very low, "so that I might listen from the passage without anyone thinking to send me on an errand." Then the set ended, and the wariness came down over her face again like a shutter, and she curtsied and thanked him and slipped away toward the shadowed side of the room before he could keep her. He did not follow, but he watched her go, and he watched Selina Pruitt catch her stepsister by the wrist in the doorway and hiss something low and vicious into her ear, and he watched Rowena bow her head and take it. And Everard Thorne, who had told himself for 10 years that he wanted nothing that could be bought and nothing that could be flattered out of him, discovered that he wanted very much to know what would become of the woman in the gray gown. He made inquiries. It was easily done. A duke's curiosity opens most doors. Rowena Fairley was the daughter of a gentleman of small estate who had died when she was 14, leaving a widow and a girl, and a portion of £2,000 settled upon the daughter alone. The widow had married Sir Marcus Pruitt within 2 years and had herself died of a fever the winter after, and since then the girl had lived at Ashcombe on sufferance her portion. Everard learned with a slow and building anger, administered entirely by her stepfather, who drew upon it freely and accounted for it to no one. £2,000. It was not a great fortune, but it was hers, and she did not seem to know that it was being spent to dress her stepsisters in the silks that made her own gray gown look like a scullery maid's. His man of business, a dry and careful person named Halloway, laid the papers before him and said only, "It is not strictly illegal, your grace. A guardian may administer a ward's portion, but he is meant to account for it, and Sir Marcus has accounted to no one in 7 years." "She does not know," Everard said aloud in the great cold library at Langbourne. "She thinks she lives on their charity." And he set down his glass and looked into the fire a long while. He was a man who had spent his life being handled, flattered, courted, angled at, and he had grown to trust almost nothing that was offered to him with a smile. But he had watched a woman give away her one bright evening to a girl who despised her, and expect nothing, and ask for nothing but a little more music. That, he thought, could not be counterfeited. That was simply who she was. "Holloway," he said, "find me an occasion. I mean to call at Ashcombe, and I mean to be invited." The invitation was managed within the week, and it cost the Duke of Langbourne nothing more than a hint, dropped in the right ear at his club, that he was minded to look over the hunting country near Ashcombe. Sir Marcus Prewitt's letter arrived by return of post, so eager it was nearly damp, begging his Grace to honor the house with a stay of any length he pleased. Everard accepted for 3 days. He suspected he would need fewer. Ashcombe was a handsome house gone slightly to seed at the edges, the gravel unraked, a shutter hanging crooked on the west front, and its master came out to meet the ducal carriage bareheaded, all bows and beaming welcome. "Your Grace honors us beyond words, beyond words. Selina, Georgiana, where are the girls? Ah, here they are." The two sisters descended the steps in their finest mourning gowns, arranged like a pair of ornaments upon a mantle. Rowena was not among them. She appeared only at dinner, and only Everard understood at once, because a guest of his rank could not be served without every hand in the house pressed into use. She wore the grey gown. She carried dishes to the sideboard and directed the 2 flustered maids with quiet competence, and she was not offered a seat at the table. When he rose deliberately and said, "Will Miss Fairley not join us?" the whole table went still. "Rowena," Sir Marcus laughed as though at a great joke. "Bless you, your Grace, Rowena is far happier making herself useful. She has no conversation, poor creature. Sit, girl, if his Grace wishes it. No, not there, fetch a chair from the wall." And Rowena, her face perfectly composed, fetched a plain chair from against the wall and set it at the very foot of the table, below the salt, and sat with her hands folded, while the family talked over and around her as though she were a piece of furniture that had unaccountably learned to breathe. Everard talked to her anyway. He asked her opinion of the harvest, and she gave it precisely, for she kept the accounts and knew to the bushel what the land had yielded. He asked whether she had read the new poem everyone was quoting, and she had, and thought it overpraised, and said so with a dryness that made him laugh aloud into the appalled silence of the Prewitts. Selina attempted 3 times to turn the conversation to her own accomplishments upon the pianoforte. Sir Marcus grew red. And Rowena, who had plainly resolved to say as little as possible, was drawn out word by word until she forgot to be afraid. And for the length of one course she was simply a clever woman talking with a man who wished to hear her, and it was the most alive he had seen her look since the dance. Then Sir Marcus said, jovial and cutting, "You will forgive her boldness, your Grace. We have perhaps been too soft with her. A girl in her position ought to know when to hold her tongue." And the light went out of her, and she rose and began clearing the plates, and Everard felt the anger move in him like a live thing. He stayed his 3 days. He rode out with Sir Marcus and let the man exhaust himself with hints about his daughters. He drank the baronet's indifferent port and endured Selina's playing and Georgiana's simpering, and all the while he watched. He watched Rowena rise before the household and bank the fires. He watched her go over the tradesmen's bills at a little table in the cold morning-room, and correct an overcharge, and save her stepfather 4 shillings he would never thank her for. He watched her slip a heel of bread and a wedge of cheese to a ragged boy at the kitchen door out of her own untouched supper. He watched her, once in the walled garden at dusk, standing quite alone among the espaliered pears with her face turned up to the last light, and he did not disturb her, because he understood that those stolen minutes were the only thing in the house that was hers. On the last morning, he found her in the morning-room among the ledgers, and he shut the door. "Miss Fairley, I must speak with you plainly, and I have not much time before your stepfather comes to see me off." He set his hat upon the table. "You are being robbed." She looked up wary. "Your Grace, your father left you £2,000, settled upon you in your own right to be administered by your guardian until your marriage or your 25th year. You are 23 now, I think. In that time your stepfather has drawn the whole of the income and a good deal of the capital, and he has accounted for none of it, and he has let you believe you live on his charity. You do not. He lives in part on yours." The color left her face and then came flooding back. "That cannot be. I keep the accounts I would have. You keep the household accounts. Your portion is not in them. I have seen the settlement papers. My man of business obtained a copy. I did not seek them to shame you. I sought them because I could not reconcile the woman I met at Wexhall with the position she was kept in, and I wished to know why. He watched her hands close hard upon the edge of the table. I am sorry. It is a wretched thing to learn at such an hour and from a near stranger. For a long moment she said nothing at all. When she spoke, her voice was very steady, and it was worse than tears. 7 years, she said. 7 years I have thanked him for my bread. She looked at the ledgers, the neat columns in her own hand, the 4 shillings she had saved him, and I have been paying for it the whole time. You have, Everard said gently. She stood. She crossed to the window and looked out at the walled garden, at the pears, at the small kingdom of her stolen minutes. When she turned back, her chin was up and her eyes were dry and blazing. Why are you telling me this? A duke does not trouble himself over £2,000 and a stepdaughter he has known a week. What is it you want, your grace? It was, he thought, a fair question and an honest one, and it deserved an honest answer. A month ago, he said, I would have told you I wanted nothing. I have spent 10 years being wanted for what I own and courted for what I might bestow, and I had grown to trust nothing that came to me sweetly. And then I watched a woman give away her one evening's pleasure to a girl who scorns her and ask for nothing, and I thought, there, that is real, that cannot be bought. He came a step nearer. I did not come to Ashcombe to look at the hunting country. I came to look at you. And what I want, Miss Fairley, is your leave to court you honestly, in the open, as you deserve to be courted, and failing that, at the very least, to see you restored to what is yours, so that you might be free of this house whether you ever wish to see my face again or not. She stared at him. You cannot mean it. A man of your rank, there are 100 women better born, better dowered. There are a great many women who would have me for my dukedom, he said. I have never yet met one I wish to keep for herself, until now. He picked up his hat. I will not press you. You have had one shock this morning, and I'll not force a second upon you. But hear me, Rowena, whatever you decide about my suit, the money is yours, and I will see it returned to you if I must drag your stepfather through every court in England to do it. That much I promise you, and it asks nothing in return. The door opened then upon Sir Marcus, all smiles, come to see his noble guest away. Everard bowed over Rowena's hand in full view of the baronet's astonished face, and said, loud enough to be heard, I hope, Miss Fairley, that you will do me the honor of receiving me again very soon, and had the deep satisfaction of watching Sir Marcus Perwitt go grey with the sudden, dawning understanding that he had let something valuable be discovered under his own roof, and had spent 7 years grinding it into the floor. He called and he kept calling, all through that green and lengthening month. He did not come as a great man conferring favor. He came as a suitor, hat in hand, and he let Sir Marcus fawn upon him at the door and then walked straight past the parlor where Selina sat waiting at the pianoforte to find Rowena in the morning-room with her ledgers. The first time she would not sit with him unchaperoned and made him take his tea among the whole family, where Selina played and Georgiana talked and Rowena was permitted, grudgingly now, a proper chair. But he learned to come earlier before the sisters were dressed, and to bring a book he thought she would argue with, and to say, read me the passage you dislike most, so that she might quarrel with him for an hour and forget to be careful. You are trying to make me trust you, she told him once, over the ruined poem, which is precisely what a man who could not be trusted would do. It is, he agreed. It is also what a man who could be trusted would do. You will have to decide which I am by watching, not by listening. I find I am content to be watched. And watched he was, closely and without mercy, and he did not once flinch from it. He brought no gifts that could be counted as bribes, no jewels, no silks that would only have set her apart from herself. But he brought seeds for the walled garden, and a good lamp for her cold morning-room so she should not strain her eyes, and once a single perfect pear from his own hothouse, wrapped in a handkerchief, because he had seen her face turned up to the espaliered trees at dusk and understood what they meant to her. She ate the pear slowly that time, and did not thank him in words, and he counted it the greatest triumph of his life. He returned to Langbourne, and he set Halloway to work in earnest. And he wrote to Rowena not through her stepfather, but by a groom instructed to place the letter in her hand alone. A short, plain letter, asking leave to call, and enclosing a copy of the settlement so that she might see with her own eyes that he had told her the truth and no part of a lie. Her answer came in 4 days. It was very short. You have told me the truth, and I find I am not sorry you did, though I have wept over it more than I like to admit. You may call, your grace. But I warn you, I have been made a fool of once for trusting a smiling man, and I do not mean to be made a fool of twice. Come then, and let us see whether you are as honest in June as you were in May. It was not a warm letter. But it was hers, unguarded and sharp and true, and Everard read it 3 times and then folded it into his breast pocket and kept it there. Halloway did his work quietly and well. By midsummer the whole of it lay documented, 7 years of awards income diverted, capital drawn down without account, the settlement's plain terms flouted by a guardian who had gambled on the certainty that a grateful, frightened girl would never think to ask. A single letter from the Duke of Langbourne's solicitors, laid before Sir Marcus with the promise of the King's Bench behind it, was enough to bring the baronet's whole edifice down. The money would be restored, every shilling of the capital and interest reckoned to the day, or the matter would go before a court, and a court would ruin him. But Everard did not want it settled by letter, in some grey office, where Rowena would never see the reckoning made. He had watched her stand below the salt and thank a thief for her bread, and he found he wanted, with a fierceness that surprised him, for the whole county to see her stand somewhere else entirely. So he gave a ball. He gave it at Langbourne in the great gallery that had not been opened since his father's day, and he sent his invitations wide, to every family of consequence for 30 miles, and to Sir Marcus Prewitt and his daughters, and to Miss Rowena Fairley, whose card was written out separately, in the Duke's own hand, and delivered to her hand alone. Ashcombe received the news in an uproar of triumph. Sir Marcus was certain at last of his prize. A ball at Langbourne could mean only one thing, and that thing was Selina, splendid in new rose silk bought on credit against a fortune he still believed was his to spend. They arrived in force, the Prewitts, Selina and Georgiana glittering like a jeweller's window, Sir Marcus swollen with anticipation. And behind them, a half-step behind as always, came Rowena, but she did not come in grey. She came in a gown of deep midnight blue, plain of ornament and perfect in cut, that Everard had not sent and could not have sent, for she would not have worn it if he had. She had made it herself, he would learn, out of cloth bought with the very first coins her stepfather had been made to disgorge, sitting up 3 nights by her good new lamp. And she wore it not to dazzle, but as a woman puts on armor, and she was, in the blaze of 1,000 candles, the most beautiful thing in the room. The gallery was full when he had her announced. A quartet played beneath the great chandelier, and its 10,000 crystals threw the candlelight down in a warm and trembling rain over silk and lace and pearls, over the whole bright, cruel apparatus of a world that had never once made room for the woman in the doorway. Selina had already been drawn to the head of the room, where a duke was expected to open the dancing with the finest lady present. Sir Marcus stood beside her, glowing. The county watched and waited, and understood that a choice was about to be made, and arranged itself to see whom the wealthiest man among them would choose. Everard Thorne set down his glass, and he crossed the room. He crossed the whole glittering length of it, past the chandelier's falling light, past the finely dressed and the finely born, past Selina Prewitt in her rose silk turning toward him with her practised smile already blooming, and he did not stop. He walked by her as though she were a lampstand, and Selina's smile broke apart upon her face, and Sir Marcus's ruddy triumph drained to a terrible grey, and every head in that gallery turned to follow the Duke of Langbourne to the far end of the room, where a woman in midnight blue stood alone and very straight against the shadowed wall, exactly where she had spent her whole life being left. He stopped before her and bowed, low and full, the bow a man gives to the one person in a room who matters. The signet ring of his house caught the candlelight as he offered his hand. Into the enormous silence he said, so that every soul present should hear it. Miss Fairley, there is no one in this room, nor in any room whose company I would prefer to yours. Will you do me the honor?" And here his voice did not waver at all, not merely of this dance, but of every dance I have left to give. "I have no wish to open this ball with anyone but the woman I intend to marry, if she will have me. Will you have me, Rowena?" She looked at him. The whole county held its breath. Somewhere near the front, a fan snapped shut like a pistol shot. And Rowena Fairley, who had been overlooked in every room she had ever entered, who had thanked a thief for her bread and given away her one bright evening to a girl who despised her, looked at the man who had crossed 1,000 candles to reach her, and did not lower her eyes and did not doubt. "I have watched you since May, your grace," she said, clear enough to carry, "as you asked me to, and I find you are as honest in July as you were in May." The corner of her mouth curved. "Yes, I will have you." He raised her hand to his lips, and the gallery erupted, not into scandal as the Prewitts had prayed, but into the delighted, greedy applause of a crowd that loves nothing so much as to have witnessed a great romance at first hand. He led her out beneath the chandelier and opened the ball with her, midnight blue against his dark coat, and she did not dance stiffly now. She danced as though she had been waiting her whole life for the music to go on a little longer than it did, and now it would never stop. Behind them the Prewitts stood ruined in the crush. There was no scene made against them. Everard had judged rightly that the sight of Selina's face as her stepsister was chosen, and the slow public understanding of why the Prewitts had suddenly gone so gray and silent was a fuller punishment than any words. But the reckoning came, and it came thoroughly. Word of the restored fortune spread within the week. The tradesmen of Ashcombe, who had extended Sir Marcus credit against a wealth that was never his, came calling with their bills, and the new rose silk was among the things that had to be sold. The invitations that had once flowed toward Ashcombe dried like a stream in August, for society, which had turned its face from Rowena for 23 years, discovered that she was to be a duchess and rearranged its affections overnight, and would not now be caught dead at the table of the man who had used her so. Selina married, in the end, a wine merchant's son of comfortable means and no manners, and thought herself hard done by ever after. Georgiana did not marry at all. And Sir Marcus Prewitt lived out his days at a shrunken Ashcombe, in a house where no duke ever came again, chewing on the knowledge that he had held a treasure in his hand for 7 years, and had spent the whole time counting it as nothing. They were married in the autumn at the small church near Langbourne, and it was not a grand wedding because neither of them wished it grand. Rowena's £2,000 was settled entirely upon herself, at Everard's own insistence, in terms no man living could touch, so that "you shall never again," he told her, "thank anyone for your bread, least of all me." She wept a little at that and let him hold her, and did not pretend she was not weeping. There is a scene, long after, that he keeps folded away in his mind, the way he kept her first sharp letter folded in his breast pocket. It is a winter evening at Langbourne, and the fires are lit, and the great cold library that had once been the loneliest room he owned is warm now and full. Rowena sits in the good lamplight with a book she is losing an argument with, and her feet are tucked under her in a way no duchess ought to permit herself, and there is a bowl of pears from the hothouse at her elbow, because he has never once let the season pass without them since. He is watching her over the top of his own book. She catches him at it, as she always does. "You are staring, Everard." "I am. I find I am content to watch. You told me once I should have to decide what sort of man I was by watching, not by listening." He set his book aside. "I have decided something else instead. I spent 10 years certain that everything offered to me was counterfeit, and everyone who smiled at me wanted the dukedom and not the man. And then a woman in a gray gown gave away her whole evening to someone who scorned her and asked me for nothing but a little more music." He reached across and took her rough, warm, clever hand in his, and turned the plain gold band upon her finger. "You are the one true thing I was ever given. I knew it in a ballroom before I knew anything else about you, and I have not once in all the time since had cause to doubt it." She did not answer at once. She only turned her hand within his so that their fingers laced, and looked at him in the firelight with those grave, clear eyes that had looked away from the whole glittering world on the night he first saw her, and did not look away now. "Then the music has gone on longer than I dared to wish," she said. "Rather longer, I think, than either of us shall ever be able to count." And beyond the tall windows the snow came down over Langbourne, over the walled garden and the sleeping pears, and inside, in the warm and unhurried light, the Duke of Langbourne kept his watch over the one thing he had ever wanted for itself alone, and was content at last, and never after that had any cause to be otherwise.